I think anytime you're in a place where you have to compromise and you have to work with people of difference, it makes you better. Like when you're surrounded by everyone who thinks like you, that's how fundamentalism happens.
Yeah, of all stripes.
Of all stripes.
Yep.
And I think there's a give and a take with the compromise of living here. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I feel like it's made me sharper.
I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. My guest for this episode is, as so many guests are, kind of a jack of all trades. Luna Malbroux is a comedian, a writer, a playwright, a diversity and inclusion consultant, and a trained social worker. Luna uses humor to shine a light on politics and identity in America, and she has an amazing story and an amazing body of work, from a hilarious equity-creating app to her thought-provoking theater production to her amazing socially conscious stand-up. But as you'll hear, none of those alone fully represent what she thinks of as her work, and I'll let her tell you more about that. Luna and I sat down together on a beautiful Friday morning in late summer at the American Sign Museum in Cincinnati's Camp Washington neighborhood. Look, I know I say this a lot, but this is an episode where you really have to check out the photos on our website, in this case by the amazing Angie Lipscomb. The American Sign Museum is a time capsule, a museum dedicated to the art and history of commercial signs and sign making. It is the largest public museum of signage in the United States. The 20,000 square foot warehouse contains over 100 years of commercial signage, and you can take a guided or self-guided tour or just wander the museum on your own. Luna and I actually hid out in the Sign Museum's workshop, which is a wonderland of neon and carpentry and sign-making knowledge, and a quiet place away from the museum's visitors and the hum of the historic neon signs. Check out the website, thedistillerpodcast.com, and get a feel for the setting we were in as you listen. Now, I had never met Luna before we sat down this conversation, but I knew I was in for a treat, just reading through her website and doing some background research. But still, I loved hearing how Luna ties all her threads together into a single quilt that is uniquely her. It is so easy to see someone's online presence and think they have everything figured out. But Luna was honest about the challenges of work that is so varied and about the daily process of piecing it all together. And it's amazing to see someone with such a clear vision of what her work is express that in such varied and interesting ways. So let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Luna Malbroux on The Distiller. Cool. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me at the Sign Museum amid all the neon.
Yeah, happy to be here in what I hope is chemically safe environment.
As far as we know it is. I usually start off just asking people sort of what they do. I feel like for you, this is a really loaded question that I'm actually excited to hear you answer.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily what's your job, just what is your work?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start off right there in whatever way you want to answer that question.
Yeah, I think my work is really simple. The doing is more complicated, but my work is really simple. I explore complex ideas in a way that people can understand. That's it.
Cool.
Often using humor, sometimes using storytelling, but really complex ideas, how we live, and making that really tangible and accessible and like felt in your body.
Awesome. In whatever form.
Whatever form that is. Yeah.
Because on your website it says comedian, playwright, author.
Yeah.
But then you look deeper into, and you're an app developer, and you have a master's in social work from Columbia.
And there's another website that has diversity and inclusion training, but that I keep separate from that. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the thread around comedy and writing is, I feel like if you're a writer these days, you kind of have to diversify your stuff. And I so happened to stumble upon a contest where I was able to develop an app, which was really amazing. Playwriting, writing sketches, writing what I hope to be a future novel. writing blogs and writing posts for different websites and doing stand-up comedy. That kind of, I feel like, is the business of
Yeah.
being a writer these days.
Yeah.
And all of that is kind of like we're living in a slash.
Totally. Is that all stuff that like you feel given the opportunity you would want to do that stuff anyway, or is that the necessity of being a writer and you have to put as many things out there as possible to cast the net and see what's going to hit?
I think a little bit of both. I think at first it was casting the net, and then I'm like, oh no, I'm really good at exploring like what comedy looks like in different genres, like comedy in app form, comedy in play form, comedy in TV form. So I think that's really cool. It's just like, how many different genres can I explore?
Yeah.
I'm really excited about.
So how much stand-up do you do these days?
I do a lot of stand-up still.
Okay.
I think being relatively new to the Cincinnati scene, I'm still trying to kind of get my feet in, but I just performed last weekend, and whereas I used to perform literally every night, it's more about quality over quantity, and I'm in the process of creating my own show here in Cincinnati,
Awesome.
which I'm really excited about, to just have something regular that I'm producing myself, and then I do shows that go bananas and work with other comedians and various shows that they do here, which is really cool, and across the country also.
Yeah. Is the stand-up, is it, how do I phrase this? Like, so much of your stuff is kind of mission driven. Is that communication piece of taking complex ideas and specifically about inclusion and diversity in a lot of the work that you've done? Is the stand-up a vehicle for that? Or is the stand-up something that you would be doing regardless of whether it was the opportunity for such a specific material?
Stand-up is, I think at first the stand-up was a vehicle for that, and then I got into the point where I realized the stand-up is a vehicle for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you remember the movie, what was that movie? It was the Bruce Willis movie. He was a superhero, but it was very subtle. It was the M. Night Shyamalan. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah. I know exactly
It's
which
bothering
one
me that
you're
I can't,
talking about.
It's one of my favorites. Unbreakable. Anyway.
Yes, with Samuel Jackson.
Yes.
Yep.
So I had this thought the other day when I was thinking of it. There's this monologue Samuel Jackson goes into in that movie where he's just like, many superheroes have an alter ego, but Superman's alter ego is actually pretending to be human.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually Superman, and he pretends to be us, like bumbling that idiot, that kind of like klutzy person is his interpretation of us. And I had this thought the other day when I was just like, oh my gosh, that's me with stand-up. Like, I feel like when I go throughout my day, I feel pretty contained, and I'm containing myself and pretending to be a normal person. But on stage, I'm very much myself, and
That's
I'm very
the real
comfortable. And I'm like, yeah, it's the real me. And I think because I'm in a lot of environments where I have to put on a face, either where there's like facilitating or, working or doing communication stuff, it's just like very reserved. And I think just being a Black woman in the United States, I'm always like
Pulling it in
and analyzing my surroundings and figuring out where I can be where. But on stage, it's just like, well, you entered my realm.
Here it is. You paid.
Yeah, this is my space now. So I'm taking over, and I can just kind of relax and just say what I need to say and be what I need to be.
When was the first time you did stand up?
Ooh, I feel like it was in 2012. It's about 6 or 7 years ago. And I grew up acting. I grew up in a small town. We had a little theater. I was there all the time. I was the city like thespian, and grew up doing like comedic acting as well. So I was super comfortable on stage, and I did not think about stand-up comedy at all. It was something that did not cross my mind as something I wanted to do. But it was when I moved to San Francisco from New York City, and I was working as a therapist, and I was really stressed, and I stumbled upon an open mic, and it was just horrible, like most open mics are. And I thought to myself, oh, I could give this a try. And I think maybe like a week later, I gave it a try at an open mic and did really good.
Nice.
And then
Did you have a set, or were you just sort of riffing?
It's funny because I had this joke I thought of as I was walking, and it's a joke I still tell to this day every now and then. A couple of jokes I still tell to this day from the first jokes I did. But I kind of had two big jokes in my head, and then everything else kind of flowed from that.
Nice.
Yeah.
It felt good.
Yeah, it felt good.
Cool.
And it was something that I didn't think that I was going to take seriously, because I've tried a lot of stuff and I never stuck with anything. But I got asked to do shows, and kind of got asked to do shows for a couple of years, to the point where I'm like, oh, I should take this seriously.
Yeah.
And then started taking it seriously.
Cool. So you touched on this a little bit. I'm just interested in, how does a degree in social work from Columbia get to all the stuff that you're doing right now? And I suspect there's a lot more in it than just starting with that degree. So you started out acting. Well, it's funny because I think I'm at the point where I'm bitter a little, I'm in my early 30s, and that's the point where I feel like the shit really hits the fan, and you're just like, oh, this is the stuck place. This is is this what my life's going to be or not? Yeah.
And I guess I'm bitter because I was, and I say this like completely humbly, a really naturally talented kid in acting and theater and all this stuff. And my parents, who, grew up in rural southern Louisiana, at a time right after desegregation ended, were kind of like, theater, arts, you can't don't do that. That's so unstable.
Yeah.
You got to do something really solid.
You got to have a career.
You got to have a career. You have to have something to fall back on. And that was good advice for their time. And I took that advice. So I was like, okay, even though I got a scholarship to study drama in undergraduate at Loyola University, I ended up getting another scholarship to go to Southern University, and I majored in political science. Wanted to go to law school at first, until I realized, no, that's not quite the place. And teachers were kind of like, well, it seems like you love understanding sociology, so maybe that's it. And a social work degree is very flexible. So I kind of was like, okay, this is the path. This is a flexible degree, and was interested in doing therapy, was interested in actually being a sex therapist and working with people with trauma. And so I went to school for that. Because my undergraduate was a great university, Southern University, but it was in the South, I really wanted the experience of having like an Ivy League education. Like, what does that look like? And so it was important for me to kind of go to a top tier school for graduate school. And I was at the time very aware. I mean, I graduated right as the recession hit, 2008, 2009. So I was very aware of like how important at that time, like I felt like pedigrees were to get a job, in a very hard place to get a job. And all of this I say now is what makes me really bitter, because because first of all, now we're in an economy where it's just like, what is stable? Nothing is stable.
Nothing is stable, right.
A
pedigree doesn't
mean anything.
Yeah.
Nothing is stable. So all the kind of good advice that I was told that I took is just like, wow, if I would have just followed my passion.
Right.
Honestly, the most stable thing right now that's growing is in the realm of entertainment. And despite the fact that I had this fancy graduate degree, my first job after grad school was just like, yeah, we need you to work our Twitter. And like, okay.
Sure.
So it's like, yeah, that's great. But help us
we know
with
you got a
social
master's
media.
in social.
Yeah. So it's so funny because these are the things that are driving business now, is like creativity and, so I'm at the point right now where I'm just starting to let go of that bitterness, because like, of course I'm sitting with an enormous amount of debt that I now make fun of in stand-up, because what else are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
You just got to laugh about it. And I mean, who cares? The economy's crashing anyway. It'll only be a matter of time before it's wiped out. Like,
right. The banks that own that debt are not going to exist in 5 years.
Yeah.
So
I'm just
okay.
waiting. That's my plan. But yeah, so I'm at this point where things are starting to be on this upcycle where I'm getting really interesting work, ask for work where it's just like, hey, we need someone who's really humorous and someone who understands societal issues to really kind of enter at this point. And it's just like, well, I happen to be a master's level social worker, clinician and a comedian. So there's a very specific, with a lens for equity and inclusion, and it can understand that world and make it funny. So it's like, this is kind of, I'm entering my stride where it's just like, wow, there's a need for this. There's a need for like approachable language around these things.
Right.
So it's kind of, I'm getting out of the
double-edged sword of having this expensive education, but now you do have that background that makes all the other creative stuff that you're doing have so much more depth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And you are doing so much. I don't know. This is the problem about doing research about a guest on the internet, is it's impossible to tell what's current.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really matter because it's all who you are and it's all part of a piece.
Yeah.
But I mean, you wrote a play.
Yep.
How to Be a White Man.
Yeah.
Which looks amazing. Yeah.
It's so fun.
Is that still being performed? Is that still current work?
It's so interesting because it had a lot of interest. So did it in the Bay Area a couple of times and actually talked to a few really powerful off-Broadway producers who were interested in producing it. And you know how those conversations go. Like sometimes can we take this to Broadway, off-Broadway? Yes, no. And then that kind of fell through the cracks, and then was talking about bringing it to schools. But what happened was I felt when I wrote that play first in 2016, beginning of 2016, it was a different environment culturally than it is now.
Yep.
And as much as there are parts of that play that are very still relevant, I feel like the title makes me uneasy to bring it outside of the coastal areas.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it plays around with appropriation and positionality. And even though it never was a one-person show, the original was a cast of different characters and how they kind of struggled with identity and being seen. And it pared down, and the second time I did it with between two characters, a white male and a black female. And it was really about like, the premise was black woman really strives to get this career and decides to like create a fake white male resume with the same things that she has just to see like what is happening. And then they end up hiring the white male they hiring the fake person that she created, and then she has to kind of go out and create an avatar.
Right.
So this is very much, it played around with all these different ideas. And I think the thing that killed the play ongoing for me was that there was this trailer going around called Letitia or something, but it was basically the exact opposite of my play, in which a white man is trying to get a job and no one's hiring him because, quote unquote, affirmative action.
Right.
So he creates a black woman persona, and I'm just like, ew.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's when you gotta walk away.
Screwed up time that we are.
Yeah,
where that narrative is flipping back on itself.
exactly.
Yeah, there was, my partner's a poet, and there was a guy in the poetry world, and I'm not going to know the names, which is just fine, but there was a poet who was getting a lot of press, and then it turned out it was, I think it was just a white guy who had created this avatar of an Asian name and was writing and publishing poems under this name. And when he was outed for this, the narrative supposedly was the same. It was like, I had to do this to break through.
Yeah.
And so much of what you do is so interesting around privilege. It's a difficult conversation to have. I've had some of those conversations on this show, most successfully, and I just mean successfully in terms of actually getting at the issues and having the conversation. I talked to Danny McLean. Do you know Danny?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. A couple of episodes Danny and I were talking about, and we were talking about her book, and we were talking about Claudia Rankine's article in the New York Times recently. I don't know if you read that.
I didn't see it.
She basically is, and we talked about it in that episode, so I won't fully unpack it, but she's just saying, I wanted to know what white men thought about their own privilege, so I started asking them. And it's a series of instances on airplanes where she is initially like actually trying to break through her own insecurity about these conversations. It's hard to imagine Claudia Rankine having any insecurity about these things, but it's telling the ways in which she does. And then she sort of breaks through and but it's like such a taboo area, and so much of what you're doing is so great because it takes it sort of through the back door in the sense of through comedy, exposing these things in a way that I don't know if it necessarily like deflects defensiveness. if you feel like it does
I
that
think
for
it
the white
does.
audience?
Yeah, I think it does. And I feel like it's interesting because I'm not necessarily trying to, I think I want to be clear because sometimes I feel like the way that certain things that I have created get packaged just like this helps white people learn. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily my goal,
Yeah.
is really just to expand conversations as a whole and to really like express things from myself as an artist. And I do think overall, in general, people's defensiveness drops when
When it's
it's
comedy.
about comedy
Yeah.
and when it's about a person,
Right.
and when it's a story that they can relate to. I think that helps them understand.
Yeah. Do you find yourself getting put in this position of you're now the spokesman for creating this entire dialogue for people?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of happened in more so in the past, and I think especially with How to Be a White Man and Equitable, the app, and it was just kind of like, this is the spokesperson. And so I feel like the great thing about none of that stuff really, well, not necessarily none of it passing over to Cincinnati, but the fact that like no one knows me really in Cincinnati is that I can kind of like have a fresh start and kind of explore different things outside of that paradigm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
talk about Equitable a little bit, because it's an amazing idea. I want to let you frame it up.
Yeah, so I had the great pleasure of stumbling upon Comedy Hack Day, which is this competition that brings comedians and app developers together, and it's just like who can pitch the funniest app. And at the time it was so funny because I get into this competition and everybody there is so techie and like they're working on these computers and they have all these fancy things. And at the time, like literally the day before, my computer was stolen, so I came in with a notebook and I had the idea immediately of basically there was a lot of talk around the time about the wage gap. And I kept on hearing women make 77 cents to the dollar, but I knew that wasn't necessarily the case because I knew that black women make 64 cents to the dollar and Latina women make 54 cents to the dollar. And so I was just like, well, there's a racial lens here that is being missed when we talk about the wage gap. And so I really wanted to play around with that. So my idea at the time, based on a good friend of mine who has an MBA and would always run around saying MBA things like what gets incentivized gets done. So I was like, okay, how can we incentivize people actually, working for the wage gap? And so it's just like, well, that's a tax. You have to pay this back. So it's just like, it's basically an app that splits any dinner bill fairly based on the percentage of the US dollar that you make. So we use real percentages from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, which gets a lot of people upset, but the percentages we use are based on research.
Why does that get people upset? Because they don't agree with them?
Well, because they don't agree with them, and a lot of people are like, well, I'm a white man, but I don't make a lot of money, so it should be gone. It should go by, how much money you make.
Right,
and like,
right.
No,
it's about opportunity.
It's about
history.
opportunity. Exactly.
Yeah.
And history is actually what we say we use to calculate it. So it's really,
right.
Yeah.
There's a video online, I'll post it on the website, of you, and I don't know if it was a TED Talk but talking about the app, which is just genius, where you're showing like how the app functions. Is the app a thing now? Is it available?
So it's funny because it is not available because we put it on iOS, and after the iOS update, we have to update it. But I just shared it at another coding convention, like literally a few weeks ago, and a couple of developers came up and were like, "Let's work on it. Let's put it back up. This has to be available again."
Yeah,
so
good.
It's currently in works again too.
No, it's genius, and all the different. I put some different like app features into my notes. There's a diversity tracker.
Yeah.
Gender on a spectrum.
Yes.
Which I loved. You talk about it as affirmative fraction.
Yeah.
Which is good, and then the built-in protest feature. So
you have to have a built-in protest feature.
Yeah, it's fantastic. If you're listening, go to the website, link to the video.
Yeah.
It's really, really fun.
It's great. And that kind of changed my life and my trajectory, because what happened is that app came out, it kind of blew up, went viral to the point where Breitbart was writing articles about it, New York Post, liberal press and like maybe alt-righty press as well. And at the time I was very much in this bubble where you can, the joke within Equitable is that the premise behind it is like, we all understand that the wage gap is real. And
Right.
This is a thing. It kind of exposed me to
people who don't.
people who don't even believe that there's a wage
Yeah,
gap, you
yeah.
know, and despite the fact that there's evidence and all of these things. And also people who felt that this app was real in a non-comical way and felt like it was white genocide. And like, whoa, that's
God.
oh yeah. So I think that kind of opened me up to, well, I could make these jokes as a comedian. I could kind of play around and explore these like tensions in society. But the people that are hearing that from a different perspective are hearing one thing and they're not hearing the joke. And so that made me say, well, there's a few bridges to cross in communication and exploring these ideas. If the goal is to reach people, if that's
Right.
your goal, then like saying the same jokes in the same way that you would say to one audience is not going to reach one other audience who sees everything like this as a threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, it makes perfect sense hearing you say it. I wouldn't assume, it wouldn't occur to me that part of your, for lack of a better word, like career calculations about the work that you're doing involve a greater degree of misunderstanding and potentially risk
Yeah.
the larger your audience is. It's one
Oh,
thing to
yeah.
be on a stage in San Francisco doing stand-up with an audience that probably gets it and gets the joke. It's
Yeah.
another to be online, opening yourself up to all of that criticism.
Absolutely.
How does that change? Are you more calculated in what you write and what you say now? Does it?
I definitely feel like I'm more calculated in what I write and what I say, and I think as I'm I'm growing in two different fields that are, you know, have a lot of conflict with each other, and that is being like someone who is an equity, inclusion, and belonging facilitator, and someone who consults with organizations, and the other is being a stand-up comedian. And those two things should, quote unquote, according to certain people, be in conflict with each other. I don't think they necessarily have to be in conflict with each other. But because I'm holding those two roles, it definitely informs how I show up in each one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I'm interested, and I don't know if it's part of the story. You're from the South. You went
Yep.
to school in New York.
Yeah.
You moved to California.
Yeah.
Now you're in Cincinnati.
Did all the different regions.
Is the Cincinnati part of it part of the work story?
I think so. I think I got out of, grew up in rural South and was just like, an artsy kid in the South. I had a teacher who, in high school, kind of sent me on this exchange program where I studied in Portland for a few months, my senior year. And it was just like another world. I'm just like, oh, I'm not a weirdo here. I'm normal. Like, these are my people. It was just, everything made sense. So as soon as I could, I got the hell out of the South, had to do it. And loved living in New York City, loved living in San Francisco, and really enjoyed those cushy bubbles. Like, those bubbles are nice.
For sure.
Those bubbles are great. But then when I met my current wife, fell in love, it kind of pulled me out.
Okay.
And we were back and forth. We were long distance, and I would travel here quite often because I had flexibility in the work that I was doing. And I kind of fell in love with Cincinnati at the time. Cincinnati was like, compared to San Francisco, the cost of living was insane. I could not.
That is the two ends of the spectrum in the United States, basically.
Basically.
For urban living.
Yeah, I was just blown away. I could not believe it.
Yep.
I could not believe it. And I can acknowledge how privileged that even sounds, to come to a place and be like, oh my God, you guys, it's so cheap here. like,
No, but it's true.
It is true, yeah.
That's the danger of living in Cincinnati, is you can't go anywhere else from here because you can't afford it.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
And then and I think so it made more sense for me to move here than for her to move to San Francisco.
Yep.
It just was like, I can't ask you to leave your home that you own to move into an apartment where we'll be living with roommates,
Yeah.
As adult. It's just a different lifestyle. And came here, and luckily, I was working remotely, so I could work from anywhere. And a lot of the work that I did, and a lot of the facilitation work, I have to travel for it anyway. And comedy, I was just like, well, I'll be in the Midwest, I'll be in Chicago more, and it'll work out.
It's a great central place to tour from if your job is mobile.
Great, yeah, it's
Yep.
a great central place to tour from. And I think that it's definitely been a challenge actually adjusting to the reality of Cincinnati. And
How long's it been?
it's been about a year.
Okay.
So since I moved here a year ago, and I was going back and forth for a year. So
Okay.
it's been a year since I've lived here.
And now you're here.
Now I'm here.
But I mean, it's got to also be, you're not right in the thick of things. The
Yeah.
opportunities, if you're going to do stand-up, you're not going to walk down to
Exactly.
the club and do a couple of sets and walk home or catch the train or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of have to go out of my way a little bit to make opportunities. And the comedians here are very warm and welcoming. They're very sweet. And so that's been great. But I'm still missing the amount of like stand-up opportunities that I had in front of me. And I think that also, there's it's not only the stand-up, but I think what I had access to in San Francisco was access to an international media network.
Yep.
So where
Yeah, you're going to get seen if you're doing good work.
if you're doing good work, you're gonna get seen.
Right.
Where I feel like here in Cincinnati, it's a little bit harder to be seen on
Totally.
that international level.
Yeah. Does working in the Midwest, in terms of that discussion about the risk of what you can say, does it make you better?
It absolutely makes me better.
Because you have to broaden like the
you
material
have
for
to
your
broaden
audience.
it, and you have to broaden it. You have to speak in plain language,
Mm-hmm.
and it's made me more critical of the bubble that I was in and where I'm coming from, and it's made me more critical of like, wait a minute, like what are the things that we are saying that we want? Is nitpicking on certain things actually going to be the best result for the end goal?
Yeah.
And I think the great thing about being here in Cincinnati is that it helped me see like, wait, what's at the heart of this? Like, what is actually this person trying to say? What are the values that I'm trying to make sure get risen up,
Yeah.
And I think anytime you're in a place where you have to compromise and you have to work with people of difference, it makes you better. Like,
Right.
And I think what happens on either end of the spectrum is that when you're surrounded by everyone who thinks like you, that's how fundamentalism happens.
Yeah, totally.
And
of all stripes.
of all stripes.
Yep.
And I think there's something that there's a give and a take with the compromise of living here.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I feel like it's made me sharper.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I started off by asking you your work, and you gave probably as salient an answer to that as anybody has ever given on the show. But now let's talk about your job. What are you actually doing? The app, you talked about that. You talked
Yeah.
about the play. Some of those things are kind of in the past or at least simmering on the back burner right
Yeah.
now. What are you doing right now?
So my job, I do storytelling work for organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what brings in income
Mm-hmm.
is one of that thing. The other thing that is bringing in income is doing trainings on diversity and inclusion. And it's so funny because I absolutely fucking hate the term diversity and inclusion. I hate it. I think it's jargony. I don't think people understand it. I think it's one of those things, like even the word privilege, that can get turned into so many different things.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is that? But
Just becomes a code word
it
with
becomes
no
a
actual
code
meaning
word with
of its
no
own.
meaning, and
Yeah.
that's where it's at now. But I have to use that language because when HR companies hire me, they're looking for someone who does diversity and inclusion work.
Right.
But what I actually do is help people culture shift.
Okay.
Shift the culture of their organizations, really focus on how they can connect with each other, understand how their identity and the lens that they have shapes and colors their world, and how if you're trying to communicate with someone, if you're trying to work with someone or serve someone, you have a lens. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is just helping people see, hey, you do have a lens.
Right.
You do have a bias, right? That's code word for
Yeah.
lens. But I feel like even if I say the word bias, like people get all up in arms and
They're all defensive.
all
I'm
defensive.
not biased.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just say, hey, we have, and I think that is really interesting in being like, how can I tell a story how can I help shape people's understanding without worrying about jargon? I feel like, and I think the issue with a lot of that work, right? Diversity, inclusion, belonging work, is that we're using language that's meant for people academically,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
privilege, institutionalized racism, microaggressions. These are academic terms for sociologists who are studying this.
Totally.
This is not for everyday people who are trying to figure out how can this
Right.
shape my world? Like, what does this have to do with me? Like,
Yeah.
and I think my job is to say, like, let's make this relatable. Let's make this more tangible.
How do you do that? I mean, you walk into a corporate environment where you know that they don't have a frame of reference for the jargon.
Right.
How, I mean, practically, it makes sense what you're talking about putting it in real language, but like, is it exercises? Is it?
It's exercises, it's conversations. I really use storytelling.
Okay.
I help people. The other word I like is self-awareness. I help people gain self-awareness by just saying, like, hold on, let's roll back. Like, one simple question, like, how is money talked about in your home? How did people talk about money in your home, right? Was it something that they talked about? Was it something that was hidden? How did they talk about people of different classes?
It's the Midwest. We don't talk about money here.
Okay. But yeah, like, but let's talk about how does that shape how you see it now?
Totally.
And I think doing things like that take it out of race and gender first, that help people see, hey, my way of seeing the world was shaped
Right.
by certain things.
Yep.
And if it's shaped around money, what else could it be shaped around?
Yep. These lenses that I have aren't just about race or gender. I have them, period.
I
If
have
I
them,
accept
period.
them in some places, I'm more likely to accept them in others.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think often I start with things like, I think people don't talk about geography enough. I think people don't talk about class enough. And so I like to start in those places, and also gender, because we've all been gendered. Everybody has the experience of, like, growing up and being told what you should be as a boy or a girl. Everyone has that. That's super accessible. So I start there because starting at race is like not helping people.
Jumping in the deep end of the pool.
It's jumping in the deep end of the pool, and you kind of wade in the water first. And gender is so thick in our world that even before a baby is born, we're like throwing parties about gender and buying things for this person based on what we think their gender are going to be. We're projecting all these things.
Yep.
So everyone has a very, like, real sense of what that means.
Right.
You know?
Right. Are you seeing change in the work that you're doing?
I am seeing change, and I feel like I've gotten more hopeful, and people are making connections, and just the things that people are sharing afterwards are like,
Cool.
oh my gosh, like, I didn't think about it this way. Thank you so much. And I feel like my job is really planting the seed. And planting the seed and increasing curiosity, because I feel like this work, the real work of understanding, like, where we are, how we've gotten to where we are, and how we can get out of it, and really growing to a more equitable world, is a long-term process.
Yeah.
And so often when I'm brought in, it's for a day or 2 hours, or if I'm telling a story or a video like that helps someone access it, it's like 5 minutes. But it's planting the seed that I hope will lead to more curiosity.
Yep.
And I think that there needs to be a kind of gradual, we need to be more strategic about what we're putting on people when. And I even think, this is something that I've been thinking about writing recently, is that even when we say things on a cultural, like, political scale of, like, oh, the president is racist, or this person is racist, that is racist, this is racism, I think we need to be more strategic about how and when we use that, because a lot of people don't even understand what that means. And what they're getting is that, oh, anything that you don't like, you're calling racism.
Yeah.
That's not the case. But I think until people understand that this country, the institutions that we created, are inherently racist.
Yep.
And as people who uphold those institutions, we are going to do and say racist things. And when you point out examples of that, this is an example of that. Until people understand that, it's going to be hard to come in from the other angle of just pointing out who is saying is doing racist
Yeah,
things.
and it's not, this is what you're saying, but it's not a binary thing. It's not either you're racist or you're not.
Exactly.
We all are in some way, we all have a lens that could stand to be broadened or improved.
We all do. And I think the problem that I also have with diversity inclusion trainings and a lot of this work is that it hasn't given Black people and people of color the space to explore their own internalized racism.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm really excited about my work going.
Cool.
Both like professionally and creatively, is like, what is that space? Like there's so much to unpack in our own communities around like what we've internalized.
Yeah.
And really that's what a lot of How to Be a White Man was about.
Right on.
The second time I did it was really like, what was the Black female character's idea of success? And like, where did that come from? You know?
Yeah. Just opening up all of those
Open it up completely.
conversations a little more. Is there anywhere that people can see the play in either incarnation performed?
No, you can't see it.
Nope. Sorry.
No, I'm very protective of my baby in that way.
Cool.
But I think that there is a plan to kind of turn that into a different medium, or either turning into a web series
Nice.
or something like that, where it will be more tangible. But I feel very strongly that a live experience should be a live experience, and that what is online should be geared for online, because they're going to be.
Yeah.
You have to control for who's in the room.
Totally.
And what did happen at every How to Be a White Man performance was, I'm like, wait, I'm not going to let you leave until you hear this talk back. So there was always a talk
nice.
back after every.
Some processing.
It's some processing, just to give people space to hear from other people what they took from it. Like, give the performers a chance to speak and how they understood their roles. And I think that that's kind of necessary with a piece like that.
Yeah. Totally. Part of that broadening of your lens, just hearing that somebody might have seen exactly the same thing you just saw and taken it a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. You're in this state of transition. Sometimes it's funny. It's just the world that we live in. Like if you go to your website, everything's great. You're taking off. Things are going nuts. You're doing amazing work daily. You are putting the work into it, figuring it out.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, for somebody that doesn't know a lot of what it takes, because you're casting the wide net. Now you're still doing the stand-up, you're doing the speaking and teaching, you still have your writing projects that are going on.
Yeah.
What is the machinery that you interact with every day to keep your work in that broader sense going that people wouldn't think about? I would imagine that involves agents and managers and PR and like all that stuff.
Absolutely. It is. So I have a management team that's like mainly working on like commercial work, because like acting and stuff is something that I do too. I am looking for more of an agent to focus specifically on stand-up comedy. And it's so funny because like between the acting and the stand-up comedy and the writing, all of those need their own
network.
Their own managers and networks. And so there's that. There is, I think, learning is something that I'm constantly trying to do, like online learning. I've been taking classes at Second City to say, okay, like how can I sharpen my skill set and prepare to be pitching pilots? I think the last couple of years, I don't know if this was prominent on the website or not, but I've worked with a team of people to create pilots of TV shows and have entered competitions and gotten to a certain place where then we met with certain networks, met with Comedy Central, met with people from Hulu and Refinery 29 and got some no's, which is great because I feel like that's part of the process, right?
Yeah, that's how you learn about how to make it better.
You got to get some no's to get some yeses. And so I think a big part of my process now is like really humbly going back to, okay, what do I need to really work on to sharpen? Because I think going back to when I said that I was incredibly talented as a kid, I think I coasted on that a lot. And especially with stand-up, because I was comfortable on stage from the jump.
Yeah.
It was
you didn't have to work.
I didn't have to work.
Yeah.
And I'm at a point where I'm like, oh, there are some things that doing that work would have strengthened that now these muscles are weaker because I didn't have to work in that. So I'm kind of going back and like doing a lot of work on writing and restructuring things and learning learning specifically writing for late night versus writing for a pilot versus writing different types of stand-up for different audiences, and really expounding on that.
Wow. Do you do that with people? Is that stuff that you're doing on your own? How much of
Yeah.
that's collaborative? And
It's great. That's a great question, because I just started working with someone. He reached out to me who I think would be a great guest in this podcast, Sean Braley. I don't know if you know him.
oh, I know Shan. Yeah. I love Shan.
Yeah, we just started writing together
Oh,
this
that's
week,
so
which is
great.
super cool.
Shan is wonderful.
Isn't he wonderful?
Yeah, I love what he and Chris. If I've posted stuff on the Distiller's social media, but the Cincinnati Stories, what he and Chris are doing in Cincinnati is so cool.
Yeah.
I have such a great degree of admiration for the stories that they're telling and this thing that they built and created. That's really cool. How did you and Sean hook up?
So we just saw him doing on the stand-up comedy circuit, and he had known Sarah, my wife, and then he kind of approached me a couple of weeks ago. I was like, "Hey, I'd like to start writing
Love
with
it.
you." And there are people that I meet sometimes, and I'm just like, "Yes, let's be friends. Please, let's be friends." And he was one of those people.
Oh, that's
so
great.
It's really cool, and I'm really excited about just writing with him. And the way that I would write before is really, I have a tight circle of friends. I have comedians that I really admire, and think of a joke, or a joke kind of comes to me via conversation, and the things that make me laugh really loud are the things that I'm like, okay, this is material, and sometimes those things end up working on stage, and sometimes they don't. But I kind of like talk it out first, and then I get there. And a lot of comedians have different ways of writing, and that's one of them. Sean is very much more of a writer, like
Okay.
writing everything out. And I think, and working and collaborating with different people, I'm like, okay, how will writing everything out
Change
help
what
me?
you do, yeah.
Yeah, change what I do. So
Cool. And is there something specific that you guys are working on, or is it real early?
it's real early. Right now, we're really just kind of like helping each other, either with like pieces that we're curious about, like what's another angle that this can take or something like that, which is really cool.
Cool.
Because Sean is so different from me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but that's what seems great. I mean, the idea of you and Sean working together seems like this wonderful collaboration of opposites.
Yeah. And I think that like Sean, and there's a few other comedians here in Cincinnati that are like have this really, and just Cincinnati in general, I met a lot of like really cool pastory, like Christian types of people who coming from like the anti-religious Bay Area,
Right,
like,
right, yeah.
I'm queer, I'm like all these things, kind of like left the South. Like it was really interesting to be like, okay, you guys are religious, but you're not religious like Louisiana people in a scary way. Like I'm like, you're not evangelicals. You're like cool with it. I don't know. So
It's a whole thing.
It's
That
a-
brand of, because that's my, like, and I've said this on other shows, so I won't get into it, but like that evangelical thing is my distant past background.
Yeah.
And there is that whole sort of like, okay, we believe these things, but we're actually kind of cool, and we're into social justice, and we're into equity, and,
Yeah.
like a little more self-aware.
Yeah. And you know what? I can get down with that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, I love, like I said, I can't say enough good things about what Sean's doing and the way that he's approaching it. And like, there's a lot of people, because of my background, that I come up against, that there's this religious impulse behind what they do that I just get icky about.
Yeah.
That's not Sean. Sean is a sweet, sweet person, and a genuine, like the stuff that he's doing is super genuine.
Right.
So I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. How is your work transitioning now? And now I guess I mean, like you were talking about, you referenced sort of that period in 2016, which was a real specific moment
Yeah.
in sort of race and equity and the culture in America, and now things have just blown up and gone so apeshit
So apeshit.
since then.
Yeah.
How is that influencing? You're still doing the equity work, but like, how are you looking at what happens from here on out in terms of? It sounds like your focus is shifting a little bit
Yeah.
in terms of how you're phrasing all of that. Is that coalesced into something that you see like a direction for the future?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that I see kind of coming down. One is really just the very real thing that I'm wondering around and being very curious about right now is like we're inundated with all this, inundated, whatever the word is.
It's all right. We're with you.
With all this like bad news on a regular basis.
Yep.
And I've been thinking a lot about how that has increased my stress level, how I can feel it in my body, like this tension in my body. And so I'm really curious about like disconnecting from that. Like, what does that look like? And so I'm curious about it in a creative way, like playing around, like currently writing this web series about this woman who just wants to create a positive news like show, but there's so much bad news. It's just like really
she can't break through.
Yeah, she can't break through. So I mean, there's things like that, into the very real, tangible. Like when I'm with people, how do I facilitate conversations that help them disconnect from all of that? Because they're bringing that into the rooms that I'm in, right? So I think that's a shift I'm making. I think I would love, like in my imagination, I would love myself to get to a point where I am a really practical, hands-on person that can do things and make things and recycle things in really cool ways. Because I feel like all of my skill sets are all these kind of like, intellectual, like creative
more
things.
esoteric.
Super esoteric. Yeah. But I think being faced with the very real threat of like where we are climate-wise, I'm like, all right, how can I think that's the question I have now of like, how can I like live with this planet in a more meaningful way, and how can I make that fun?
Oh,
so
cool.
So I'm fascinated by that. So Sarah and I, we just got married in March, and our honeymoon was actually on an Earth ship in Taos, New Mexico, which was my choice. Everyone thinks that it was her choice, and no one kind of saw this.
Nobody gives you credit for that?
Yeah, no one gives me credit, and no one kind of saw it coming. That like, wait, you wanted to go to this Earth ship, this completely sustainable environment that was gorgeous, by the way.
Okay, so I've heard this term before. Is it like a little mini biodome? What is an Earth ship?
It's basically, it's made from recycled materials, and it is gorgeous. So they basically, they figured out a way to have a home that is completely sustainable. Okay. So it's kind of built into the ground. It's kind of halfway into the ground where it's insulated.
Yeah.
So it's cool. The building material is made from old tires with mud all around them. So it's kind of half adobe. And then there's brick on the inside, but the bricks are made from like old cans with mud all around it. Right so on. We can just make bricks this way. It's like, why aren't we doing this? And then it's decorated with all these like old glass bottles that are cut and dyed. So they have all these beautiful cool glass decorations of different animals or shapes that are like gorgeous. So you have these gorgeous glass walls. And on the inside, there's a greenhouse with food that can grow your food. All the water that is used is like cycled through to water those plants. And you flush the toilet and it goes, I don't know. Yeah. Completely solar paneled electricity. So it's
Where did
super
you find this
sustainable.
Place?
In New Mexico, in Taos, New Mexico.
But were you like looking for it online, or did you know about it?
I think it's one of those things like you see like one of those viral videos online, which is just like, this place is completely sustainable. And I saw this like tropical like building. I'm like, what is this? And just kind of like, we could do our honeymoon here.
Yeah.
We could have a honeymoon in New Mexico.
How cool.
Yeah. And it made me real. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew how to do things with my hands.
Yeah. And I mean, we're sitting in a workshop.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I love that. That thing, I get it.
Yeah.
I've always been, the professional things that I've always done have always been esoteric.
Yeah.
And ethereal and like talking and radio and marketing and stuff. But for a few years I worked as a carpenter and I worked as a welder. And those are the jobs that I miss.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I stopped doing because you couldn't make a living in this economy.
Yeah.
Working as a welder in a right-to-work state with no unions.
This is necessary for this conversation. I was really high the other day because I was in Denver, so whatever. Also, I smoke weed on a regular basis. Not as regular as I'd want, but I was really high, and I thought to myself two things. These are important thoughts I need to share with the world.
I'm excited about this.
One was, what if the answer is like mandated that like 50% of everything that we use has to be made locally. Like kind of moving back to that place of like, let's just really just like get it locally,
Right.
support local businesses.
Can't be made in China.
Can't be made in China.
Yep.
You know, let's really support our own communities with things that are made here. And
Totally.
like that was like, I'm like, the world needs to do this. Like, I was just like, every country should start doing this. Like, cut down on all the shipping and all the.
Right.
But that's going to be my goal, is to like really get to a point where I'm like getting everything local.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
It is. And it's a behavior change.
Yeah.
So my partner's name is Sarah as well.
Awesome.
She made a big last year, a big personal push to stop using single-use plastics.
Yeah.
Super hard.
So hard.
I mean, it's just stupid stuff. It's like, it's not, I say it's hard. It's hard because it requires you to pay attention. And most of the time you don't have to pay attention. So if I go to the store and I'm buying salsa,
yeah.
it's like, oh, well, the stuff that I like is in plastic and the stuff that maybe isn't so good is in glass. And I'm going to buy the stuff that's in glass because that recycles in the plastic. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
talk about privilege. But it's a decision to be made that I have to keep in my mind.
All the time.
Yeah. And it's
so hard. Yeah.
You know, it may be like the slightest inconvenience. And that's fine. It may be a few dollars more, a few pennies more. But those little decisions make a difference.
Yeah.
What was the other? You said there were two things.
So there's two. So that was one. And then two was, I think that the way, and you said you were a journalist, so I think that the way that people write articles now with headlines is all wrong. And I think
Oh my God, yeah.
it's so misleading. And so I think
Clickbait garbage.
It's clickbait.
Yeah.
And I think the headline should just be questions. Like, do you want to learn about China's economy? Like,
Right.
that should be the headline.
Yeah.
Because I feel like nobody's reading. No, we don't read anymore.
No, because we don't trust headlines anymore.
We don't trust. Yeah, we don't trust anything. We see a headline, we're like, got it. Think I know what it is.
Yeah.
But you don't. You have to actually read the thing. So I'm just like, this should be implemented. These were my ideas.
That should be some sort of a movement, like you know, like there was that weird like Dutch film movement where they were only going to use natural light, and there's like, you know, there should be like a journalist movement,
Yeah.
like a conscious rejection of clickbait
Right.
headlines.
Yeah.
I would get fully behind that.
I know.
Part of what I do for a living now is like web marketing stuff. So like SEO,
Yeah.
and it's that crap. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, the optimal number of words.
It
It's like
is.
9 hashtags on an Instagram post has been statistically proven to, you know, it's like such
To what? What does it do?
to drive the most traffic,
Oh,
to drive the
wow.
most engagement. The magic number is apparently 9.
Oh my gosh, didn't know that.
Yeah, but I mean, all this stuff, it's like, yeah, anyway, I'm fully behind getting rid of all of that crap and
Yeah.
actually writing real things and talking about real things.
It is. And I think the other thing is, I went to a secret meeting last year that I guess I can talk about now. Speaking of that, on the data void online. Have you heard that term?
No.
So basically, the data void is basically this gap where if I'm a guy and I'm looking and I'm genuinely curious about like how can I get a girlfriend? If I type in Google, why can't I get a girlfriend? The abscess of actual knowledge or information is going to be because of feminism and women are ruining.
Yeah,
So
right.
these are like data voids online where like
The stuff that the algorithm is pushing is only the shoutiest crap and not the actual helpful information.
not only the shoutiest crap, but people like really evil people.
Yeah.
You know, and I use that word specifically, have figured out how to hack that.
Yep.
Where they are radicalizing people through that.
Right.
You know, like Dylan Roof, who is the man who shot up 9 people in South Carolina for a minute, was radicalized through the data
Yep.
voids. But like he started off like playing video games. He saw one thing that led to another. So like how can we flip it where, you know, if I'm searching like black on black crime, I won't automatically get a lot of like white supremacists,
Yeah. Right.
you know, information. And that's how people are being radicalized. So the secret conversation was like, how can we create content and how can we be strategic about our content to help fill those data voids?
Was it like a fire with fire thing? Like we're going to throw so much information out that it's going to counteract the trolls?
That's the goal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why was it secret?
It was secret. I don't know.
Don't tell any secrets. Like, was it secret because this organization is like a shadow
No,
resistance? Or?
It was a really cool like network of people from all types of work. And it wasn't like necessarily shadow, but I think being very public about like this is the goal.
Yeah.
Then
you just become a target.
Then you become a target.
Right.
So, oops, sorry, but I'm trusting that people who listen to this podcast are good people.
There's 5, 6 people that listen to this podcast, and they're all delightful people. It's gonna be fine. No, that's exciting. I love all of that.
Yeah.
Because back to sort of what you said when I just asked the direction you were talking about climate change. Mm-hmm. Everything right now is depressing as hell.
Yes.
The economy is about to tank. All the indicators are sending us into another depression.
Yep.
The Amazon's
right on burning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we thought there was hope for climate change, that nailed like the coffin. It's like everything is so dark.
Yeah.
And finding any action that seems meaningful.
Yeah.
And just finding anything to read online that gives any hope is a huge, huge need.
Right.
So I'm fully behind like anything that injects any hope and certainly any levity, using your comedic voice
that's the goal.
Raise awareness around that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like as meaningful a definition of work as I can certainly come up with right now. I have one more question for you, and it's because we have a mutual friend, Kate Hennezine, who's been on the show before. And anytime anybody refers a guest to me and says, hey, you should talk to this person, that's how I found out about you, is through Kate. I go back to them and I say, hey, I'm going to talk to Luna tomorrow. Is there anything you want me to ask? And she said, ask her about her wedding. So that is the final question, is I'm supposed to ask you about your wedding.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, we had the most amazing wedding ever. And speaking of work, it's funny because everyone talks about wedding planning and how much of a pain it was. I loved it. It was fun for me. And
but you're a show person.
I'm a show person. I'm a show person, and actually in doing that wedding, I'm like, I need to produce things again. Like I miss producing things.
Oh, I get that.
Oh yeah.
I have that in me too, where if I'm not involved in the production of something, whether it's a box that I'm going to build or like a stage production for a while. I used to tour manage bands and stuff. So
awesome.
I get it. Like being involved in putting a show together is a thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
And it was, and it's really funny because in the process of the wedding, I was just like, the run of show, this wedding that I'm in. Uh-huh. I even had to change some of the stuff from production schedule to wedding. It's a wedding. The wedding was awesome. We got married in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is 2 of our favorite cities. And we knew no matter where we got married, people would have to travel for it. So it's just let them go to a place where they can have a vacation too. Yeah. And it was basically a 3-day festival. And we had the Friday, the wedding was on Saturday. The Friday before, we had a bounce dance class. So I know you may not know what bounce music is, but it's basically New Orleans booty twerking music. Uh-huh. We had one of my good friends teach everybody how to do that, and it was amazing. Cool. Right and now she's doing bounce classes. That's her thing now. She just teaches. She's like, oh, I didn't know this is a thing. So now she's teaching people bounce dance classes in Chicago. We had a food truck the day of the wedding. We had the place where we stayed was Maison de Maccarty. So it was this beautiful bed and breakfast that had a pool. We had mermaids in the pool. We had a champagne lady greet guests with champagne. She had the hoop skirt on. You just grab it. We had a fire twirler who was there. It was just
that's a party.
It's a party.
Fire twirler
Brass band,
makes a party.
People were singing. It was just amazing.
That's great.
It was just, but the cool thing about it that I was like, oh, how can I do this all the time? Was that it felt like a festival of people who just really wanted to do well and love in their environment, and it really was awesome to give people 3 days of just connecting with other people. Yeah. And Sarah and I are both community people. So that wedding felt it wasn't about us. It wasn't it's my day, okay? That was not it. And so we really just wanted to bring a community of amazing people together, and it was so lovely. I love it. Yeah.
I love it. There's a couple of Venezuelan couple that I interviewed on the show last year, Anne-Marie Herrera and Luis Laya, and they're food people. Luis is a chef and an engineer. Mm-hmm. So he made this thing that's like this mobile grill But the same deal. I feel like I need to hook you guys up because they are all about, let's do these events, let's get people together, let's facilitate conversation that's meaningful, let's have food.
Yeah.
There's it seems like such a strong reaction to everything that's going on culturally.
Right.
Among so many people is like, let's get people together and enjoy each other and feel love and like take care of each other.
It. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about that. Even the introvert in me is like, I want to be on the sidelines watching all of that. No, I love it. Oh, that's exciting. Well, people can obviously continue to follow what you're doing.
Yeah.
We will link to your website on our website if people want to hire you for the trainings that you do, if people want to find more out about your stand-up. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
It's been such a great day. Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. It's so totally my pleasure. Thanks for coming out early and sitting under the neon with me and drinking some coffee.
It's been fun. Thank you.
This episode of The Distiller was recorded live inside the workshop at Cincinnati's American Sign Museum, located at 1330 Monmouth Avenue in Cincinnati's Camp Washington neighborhood. I want to say a sincere thanks to events coordinator Sarah Evans for making us at home and providing the perfect setting for this conversation. With over 20,000 square feet, showcasing over 100 years of American commercial signage, the American Sign Museum is, as their website says, a walk through the ages of technology and design. Check out our website at thedistillerpodcast.com for Angie Lipscomb's photos of our time at the museum, and you can also link to their website and social media pages. And stop by, say hi to Sarah, take a tour. They're open Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sundays from noon to 4. And be sure to say you heard it on The Distiller when you do. Huge thanks to my guest, Luna Malbroux. Luna is currently working on so much stuff, and the best way to keep up on all of it is to check out her website, lunaisamerica.com. There you can see information about the Equitable app, about her play, How to Be a White Man. You can see dates for her stand-up performances and more. And we have links at thedistillerpodcast.com to her website, social media pages, and some videos about the Equitable app, some of her stand-up. I, for one, can't wait to see what is next for Luna. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Logos by Scott Ryan, design, videos by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. Check out the photos of this episode. You have to see them. It is such a beautiful place. Photos for this episode by Angie Lipscomb, and you can also find links to Angie's work on our website as well. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts. Listen and download every episode at thedistillerpodcast.com, where you can see links, photos of the guests, and a map of all of our show locations. And if you enjoyed this episode, please tell somebody about it. Follow, like, and share our posts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you want to help us make more episodes, just click on the Become a Patron button on our website for more information. And finally, please do take a second to rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. It makes a big difference to helping get the word out. Until next time, I'm Brandon Dawson. Thanks for listening to The Distiller. Bye-bye.